This is the Talkin Bout the Hoosiers podcast, presented by HoosierIllustrated.com.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to episode 14 of the Talking About the Hoosiers podcast, presented by HoosierIllustrated.com. I'm joined by Alec, Lasley, and Staley. I'm Drew Rosenberg. Guys, I'd say it's good to be here, but the way Indiana basketball has been going, I don't know if it's good. Kyler, how have you been?
I'm just vibing. We're laughing right now because Alec put something in the Slack about my hair, which I'm not going to show right now, but ain't going to do it for all you people watching. But anyway, I'm proud to be here.
If you guys stick till the end of the podcast and watch all the way through, Kyler's going to show his hair. Right, Kyler?
Nope. Thanks for the view. That's what I got to say. But anyway, now, I mean, it's gloomy days right now, I'd say, for Indiana, or not even gloomy. I don't know what to describe right now. Just inconsistent days right now for Indiana. It's just a lot going on right now, and it's just not going well right now. So obviously a lot to talk about this podcast and the current state of the program, but hey, we're going to do it, aren't we?
Yeah. Alec, how are you doing?
Doing good. I think, just like Kyler said, a little interested and fired up about the next couple days and week of what Indiana is going to be able to do. A lot of questions about who this team still kind of is, and this is a time when you want to slowly find out. So we'll see what they're going to turn into. And the next 3-4 games are going to tell us a lot about where this team is going to be playing postseason wise, if that is the NIT or if that is the NCAA tournament. So I think just about everyone should be pretty excited, if nonetheless, about the next 3-4 games here.
Yeah, I hate to be the pessimist because I feel like I'm the constant pessimist on the podcast. Kyler has his very predictions for IU, season winning a ton of games. I'm the one who doesn't. And I mean, is NIT even a lock at this point? The way this team's looked, I mean, it's the same issues we saw from the very start of the season. I mean, we talked about it when they played Florida Gulf Coast Army. It was rebounding, taking care of the basketball, making free throws, a lot of mental stuff. And it's January 11th, and these are still major problems with the program.
Yeah, I mean, I'll jump in here. Yeah, you make a good point. Is this team even an NIT team? I do think they are an NIT team. I think, honestly, the difference with this Indiana team, I still think that they're going to figure out some ways to win, games. I think they're going to be pretty good on at home for the rest of the way through. It's just all going to come down to whether this team's an NIT team versus an NCAA team, if they're getting quality wins along with the quantity that I still think that they'll get. That's going to be the big difference, and I think that's what they're going to look at when the committee looks at it, and plus what they do on the road. But what we've seen so far, this Indiana team not comfortable on the road at all, especially when it comes to the backcourt issues, the turnovers, the sloppiness, and just overall the mental toughness of the team, just to figure out ways to get wins and be physical and and provide leadership, from that backcourt. Obviously, what we saw with the Rutgers game with Xavier Johnson going out, that's just not good. It's kind of pathetic, if you really want to narrow it down to a certain word. But obviously, just a lot, you got to focus on with that. But there's still a long ways to go, when it comes to, if this team's a tournament team or not.
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest thing is, is this team going to be able to actually turn anything around? The biggest, I guess, consistency so far has just been the inconsistent play, and the messaging that this team continues to have of, we need to play harder, we need to stop turning the ball over, we need to play better defensively. And at the end of the day, it's not getting better, it's not improving. If anything, it's declining in what it was a month ago. I don't think this team has any sort of identity at the moment. And that's something that you don't want going into the middle of January, when, again, there's not a single game left on the schedule that you look at and say that's a for sure win. Now, obviously, they're not going to lose the rest of these games, right? But there is no game where you, again, look at and say, okay, that we can count that as a win and put that in the bucket for Indiana's potential NCAA tournament berth. And you don't want to go into definitely the beginning of February with that same message in mind. And so it's a lot about trying to figure out who's going to step up for this team, because whatever the coaching staff is saying is obviously not worked up to this point. Whatever the theoretical captains are right now, and Xavier Johnson and Trey Galloway, whatever they're trying to do is not working. Now, granted, obviously, some of that may be because Xavier Johnson missed, a good chunk of the first half of this season. But still, at the end of the day, he's had enough time on the floor to be able to kind of at least have his voice heard. And it doesn't look like that's happening. Trey Galloway hasn't really shown to be, at least outwardly, a true vocal leader up to this point. And again, I say outwardly because, right, we're not in practice every day. We're not behind the scenes in the locker room. But from what we can tell, there is no true leader on this team. And I think if you point to anyone, it's Malik Renew. He seems to be the one guy that at least understands the importance of playing every possession, playing hard. It may not always be pretty. It may not always come across the way that it needs to. But that's also because he's a sophomore, right? And he doesn't have the amount of experience that a guy like Xavier Johnson, who's been in college for 6 years, and then Trey Galloway, who's been in college for 4 years, have under their belt. And so the biggest concern that I have is, again, if you have no idea where the player leadership is coming from, again, midway through January, that's the biggest issue. And that's not something that can be solved overnight. And unfortunately, I think that's going to be the downfall of this Indiana team this season, and really going to force this coaching staff to take a hard look at themselves going into next year and try to do something to not only turn it around, but you probably don't have a lot of guys with a lot of experience coming back next year. So you look at who that's going to have to be, and it's probably going to have to be a guy coming through the transfer portal or anything else. So they have to do a lot with trying to get something in the next 2 months from anyone on this team in terms of leadership and responsibility, or in my opinion, this is an absolute waste of a season.
Yeah, I mean, you look at leadership, and you mentioned Malik Renew. He's been the guy, it feels like all year, when Indiana needs a bucket, needs a play, they go to him. And when you have a 6-year point guard, it's supposed to be Xavier Johnson. He's supposed to be the leader. But I hate to say it, how can you be a leader if you're making dumb mistakes like punching a guy in the groin on fighting through a screen? Like, whether you think it's intentional, there's no excuse for that type of play in that situation. And then you hurt your team because now you were out for the final 12 minutes of that game. Those are mistakes that you can't, freshmen aren't making, and he is a 6-year senior making that. Xavier Johnson has the potential. When he's playing his best, he can elevate the floor of this team. And we saw it against Ohio State. I mean, 18 points, no turnovers, really, really played well. And yeah, he's still coming back from injury, so I give him a little buffer there, and he is one of the most talented guys on this team. So, for him, and I guess Trey Galloway too, the guards need to play better. It's been that we've been saying this all year. They need more from the guards. I mean, Trey Galloway, other than the Kansas game, he's not been great this year. Gabe Cupps is a freshman, and you can't really expect a freshman who wasn't even he's not a one-and-done freshman like a Jalen Hood-Schifino. You can't put that weight on his shoulders. The 6-year senior Xavier Johnson, 4th year, and senior Trey Galloway have to be those guys, and they just haven't been.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And I want to stick with X a little bit. One thing that's been really, really bugging me, going back to the Rutgers game and then going back to the Ohio State game. After the game, he talked about how he said, I need to grow up and I need to continue to grow. And I grew up this game, he said, in the Ohio State game. One, the fact that he's just saying that as a 6-year guy is already kind of mind-blowing to me. It's like, why are you saying that? Why is that even on your mind? You should already be grown. I mean, you're a veteran guy. You know what it takes. You know what Michael Woodson wants out of this team. And then to go off of that, the next game, he does something so dirty. And it was pretty obvious. Even if you're an Indiana fan and you want to put your blinders on a little bit with it, you still see what he did. And the fact is, too, is and I replayed it a few times, he was smiling and laughing as he's leaving the court and everything. It's something like that is just really bugs me as far as this leadership of this team. And then you obviously, if people saw Malik Renew after the game, he talked about how, it really impacted them, and it really kind of took them away. And they were pretty shocked when X got ejected. So not only is that affecting X, it's obviously affecting the team, and it's affecting someone like Malik Renew, who's trying his hardest out there, who, like Alec kind of mentioned, I think has been the best leader of this team, and he's only a sophomore. So, the fact that Xavier Johnson's playing like that and he's being, immature like that is very, very concerning for this Indiana team. And especially like you mentioned with Trey Galloway, who just has been mentally struggling. I think he is trying his hardest to try to be a leader, but at the same time, it's just something that's not natural for him. And he's just had a hard time this year really adjusting to that. So you obviously don't want that from your backcourt, your senior backcourt, and your two captains.
Yeah, and again, this is not something new with Xavier Johnson, right? Whether it's on the court antics or off the court, he's had issues in the past, and he's had different things pop up that have obviously, given him this sort of track record. And it's obviously not something that you need. It's not something that you want. And for this team, it's definitely not something that you can have. Again, it's whether it's the Northwestern game a couple years ago, being part of the 5 players that were suspended, whether it's last offseason, right, the speeding incident on campus, and then you look at obviously Tuesday, and for me at least, I think the Tuesday incident was probably the worst out of all 3, with everything that's kind of gone on. Obviously, the 2 knocks already with the previous 2 incidents, but everything that's happened over the last year and a half, with potentially his season being cut entirely both years. Obviously, last year missing what was basically 75% of the season, and then this year, who knows how that could have gone, right? Obviously missed a month, but he's had a lot of time to kind of sit back, reflect, and realize that, hey, there is no next year, right? Every single game you need to cherish. And for a lot of the talk that he's had over the last 2.5, 3 years, even when he first got to Indiana, but especially this offseason coming into this year, to see something like that, only 2.5 games back into the lineup from a guy who, again, has had 135 starts in his career, guy who, again, has seen potentially his career cut short by injuries twice now. But from a team captain, that's just inexcusable. And the fact that, again, you're sitting here on January 11th, a couple games into Big Ten play, and that is the main talking point about Indiana basketball at this point in the season, is the play of Xavier Johnson, the lack of leadership from Xavier Johnson. That says it right there. That not only you have some major issues with what this team is right now, but especially from Xavier Johnson in the backcourt. And it's just you want to give him the benefit of the doubt, but the more and more times this continues to happen, again, whether it's on the court or off the court, it's just hard to do that. And he just puts this team in serious trouble when you're expecting something from that talented and experienced of a player, and he comes out and either doesn't give you anything at all when he's on the floor, or does stuff like this to not only throw kind of any game plan out of the door here, but just obviously put yourself in a really difficult spot for the rest of the team. And Kyler, you kind of touched on it, the quote that Malik Renew had kind of when talking about Xavier Johnson. Just part of it, the very end of it, which I think kind of shows his leadership more than any kind of play on the court. But he goes, it was just tough to lose X at a critical time when we're trying to make a comeback. That should say it right there, right? He understands exactly what is going on in the flow of the game, and to lose anyone who means a lot to your team at that moment, it's obviously critical. But in such a big game where I think we can all say Rutgers is not a good basketball team, and there's a reason they were winless coming into this game in conference play. Granted, only 3 games, right? But still, their inability to score the ball throughout numerous games this season has been a huge issue. That just kind of shows that this was a game Indiana really, really needed to have. Obviously, the track record of not being able to win now 0-5 in the last 5 games at Rutgers. It was a game that really could have set yourself up for a really critical run that's coming up, or set you back. And now you really look at what this team is, and it's a struggle to kind of find out what they are.
Yeah, I mean, you look at this team. Comparing this team to last year, especially Xavier Johnson, he had a guy. Trace Jackson Davis is someone they relied on. He was the leader. He was a guy who was positive face, wasn't in trouble, kept his nose clean, played hard, and did all the right things both on and off the court. And this team doesn't have a leader like that. The hope was it was going to be Xavier Johnson and Trey Galloway, and we've already said it. I mean, they haven't delivered. They haven't. You have guys. I mean, the whole thing is a leader. I mean, you're supposed to keep your team in check. You're supposed to play hard and lead by example. And it's just hasn't happened. I mean, you've seen issues with the freshmen and all the stuff with Mackenzie Mbaka before the season. That stuff can't keep happening with this program. This program over the last Woodson's first 2 years were really good, got Indiana back to the tournament. And on the court, it's been a lot of positives. Not this year, but the last 2 years. But the off the court stuff, it can't keep happening with this program. And if it does, I mean, that's how a program collapses. And we're seeing it as these issues, discipline just continue to happen with Indiana basketball.
Yeah, and I mean, you look at obviously Trace Jackson Davis, the leadership that he had throughout a really difficult time in his era at Indiana basketball, right? And with this program, but look at the rest of that roster that they had last year as well, right? Super veteran guys in Miller Kopp and Race Thompson as well, which we've heard numerous players throughout Miller Kopp's couple years in Bloomington and even this season going into this year. The leadership that he had, and I think a lot of people took what Race Thompson, I think everyone fully embraced what he brought to the team, but I think a lot of people took for granted what Miller Kopp brought to this team, both on the floor, but especially off the floor and in the locker room, as not only another voice, but a guy who had a ton of experience at not only the Power 5 level, but specifically the Big Ten, and a guy who had been through a lot in his tenure as well. Not only at Northwestern, but Indiana. And I think you're starting to see the cracks that this roster had coming into this year with, we've talked about it numerous times, right? The kind of quote unquote untapped potential that this team had, especially right with the front court. But I think you really see the cracks that really were established, that Trace Jackson Davis did a phenomenal job covering up, whether it's on or off the floor. But even more specifically, I think you're now starting to see that it takes more than just one player to really lead a team, and especially seeing what Miller Kopp and Race Thompson brought to that team. I think it has been taken way too much for granted, and you're starting to see those cracks that are in that roster and in the program, quite honestly, that still exist.
Yeah, why do I feel like the most vocal leader on this floor is Anthony Leal? And he doesn't on this team, not on the floor. What I was getting at is he doesn't even hardly play. I mean, he has seen his minutes, here and there this year. But why do I feel like he's probably the most vocal? I mean, when he comes into the game, one, he's going to play 110%. He's going to take advantage of this opportunity. But automatically, when he's in the game, he's constantly talking to the guys and trying to get them to where they need to be, especially on the defensive end. Now, he's not going to be guy that's going to score a lot. He's going to make the occasional three here and there. That's kind of what he's built as, kind of a shooter, 3-and-D, I would say, type of guy. But overall, he's just a leader. And it really is mind-blowing to me that someone like Trey Galloway, and I go back to the beginning of this season, probably I think back in the summer, he mentioned something along the lines of Miller Kopp made an impact on him, and he wanted to take what Miller Kopp had taught him and apply it to this year and be a leader. Just hasn't done it. Trey Galloway, very quiet guy, but at the same time, you would hope that he's going to lead on the floor and show you what it needs to, what it takes to, win games, win these crucial games, be a cohesive unit, something along the lines of that. And he just hasn't done it. Right now, I mean, honestly, the two captains that Indiana has, Xavier Johnson, Trey Galloway, not captains in my opinion. I look at guys like Anthony Leal and Malik Renew as the true captains of this team. And I would throw in Anthony Walker as well, because he showed at times he could be a pretty good leader as well. But need more out of the seniors, especially the back two, the backcourt there, the starting backcourt. But if they don't get the leadership figured out moving forward, it's going to be a long season, just like kind of how it has been already.
Yeah, I don't think this team is mentally strong, and that starts with leadership. You see these great teams, the teams that are winning national titles, they have strong leadership. They're mentally tough, and they don't. When stuff doesn't go their way, they keep battling. You look at Indiana, the Kansas game, I think, is a perfect example. Indiana had control of that game for 35 minutes, and then some things started to go wrong, and they couldn't get back on track. There was just nothing they could do to really get themselves, to close that game out when they had a perfect opportunity to close out one of probably the most, arguably a huge win that could have been a huge win, especially when you get to the NCAA tournament, for seeding, trying to get in. And this team, it's just not mentally strong, and it's a big issue. Is you see it each game. Guys not hustling for rebounds, guys being careless with the basketball, not fighting through screens, stuff as simple as that, and it continues to kill Indiana basketball.
Yeah, and just kind of last thing that we have on the leadership, because we're obviously all going down the same path and on the same page with this, but I think right, everyone can see the lack of it on the floor in games, but I think it goes back to practice, right? This has now been a noticeable message in post-game press conferences with specifically players who have said this or had something along the lines of having to play harder in practice, bringing the energy in practice. And I think just a couple things that Malik Renew said, again, after that Rutgers loss was being tougher in practice, being harder in practice, going 100% in practice. He talked religiously about making it more game-like. And again, you're now 16 games in, and you're still talking about having to practice harder. And again, I don't put that on the coaches. There's only so much you can do as a coach to get guys to play hard, right? At the end of the day, good teams are player-led. Great teams are player-led. And you're seeing that that's not a case with this Indiana team. Trey Galloway said it after the Maryland game. Obviously, they won that game, but said the same thing, that he needs to do a better job moving forward of getting these guys to play harder in practice. Malik Renew said it basically, I think it was after the third game of the season in the middle of November, that they have to get a attitude adjustment when it comes to practice. You look to Mike Woodson and even Anthony Walker said the same thing. They need to have better energy for a full 40 minutes. And there's only one way to do that, and that's practicing with that energy and that toughness and that everything else that goes into it for a full however long that practice is. And I think it's showing that, this team has, like Drew said, is just very mentally soft, has no, true leader. And I think that shows more in the practice than it does really in the games, because obviously that stuff will translate. And to hear Malik Renew say that again after 16 games, that we need to go full speed in practice, and that's been a consistent message that everyone across the board, from coaches to players, have said after numerous games. Again, this is not just one or two games. This is now going on basically 2/3 of the season, where you can go pick out a quote and almost read it verbatim from a different player in a different game. And, it's frustrating to continue to see that happen over and over again, because it's the exact same message that obviously is not getting through. And a large part of that is obviously due to the lack of leadership.
Yeah, and Indiana, you mentioned it earlier, they're heading into a huge stretch of the season. Minnesota tomorrow night, which this isn't the Minnesota of old. It's a good Minnesota team, and we're going to get to them in a little bit. And then you go host Purdue on the following Tuesday, go to Wisconsin, and then you travel to Illinois. Those are 4 tough games. And Indiana, if they really want, they got to win at least 2, I think. And let's just jump into Minnesota. This is not the Minnesota of old. They're 12-3. Their only losses are at Ohio State, Missouri, and I'm missing one, San Francisco. Those are the only 3 losses on the year. They've beaten Nebraska, a team that Indiana got blown out by. They went on the road, beat Michigan. They beat Maryland, teams Indiana also beat. This is not, I mean, Minnesota is going to be a tough game at Assembly Hall. I believe the line opened at Indiana was 3.5-point favorites for the game, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
I mean, they're led by Dawson Garcia, who 6'11", forward, center, whatever you want to call him. I mean, he's a talented player, averaging 16.7 a game, 7.5 rebounds, 2 assists. But he has that potential to kill you. I mean, in a close loss to Ohio State, you saw he had 36 points and 10 rebounds. Like, guys like he's a guy that can really kill this Indiana team if they defend like they've been doing.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, this is not the Minnesota team of old. Just like Nebraska has gotten better, from the past few years to this year. So there are teams in the Big Ten that are better than what people had thought of. Coach Ben Johnson at Minnesota has done a really good job with this team. A coach that kind of was on the hot seat, I would say, going into this year, because they have been a really, really bad team the past few years. But it comes down to a lot of things with this Indiana team tomorrow to win this game on Friday night. They got to compete. They've got to show mental toughness, and they got to take care of the ball. I think those are kind of the main things that you look at. The offense, I will say, it's getting there. It's not as stagnant as what it used to be, but also at the same time, they go in spurts where they just show nothing and they can't get anything and they miss bunnies. The defense is obviously a thing that's just been up and down all season, mostly down. So, but they got playmakers. You mentioned Dawson Garcia, who's one of the best forwards in the conference. He really is. He's playing at a new level this year. He's going to give those guys fits. He's going to give fits all over the floor at all three levels, so Indiana's got to be ready for that, side of the ball. But Indiana's got to make a statement. I think overall with this game, they got to figure out a way to make a statement. It's not going to be a key resume win or anything like that, but they need to go in there and they need to prove a lot of people wrong. They got to prove a lot of doubters wrong, and they just got to get this fan base to relax a little bit. I think it starts with tomorrow. Like you mentioned, tough stretch. So this is one you definitely have to have if you're Indiana.
Yeah, and I mean the one matchup that obviously Dawson Garcia is going to be the name to really follow, but the bigger matchup in my eyes is in the backcourt. One of the most underrated point guards, not only in the Big Ten, but I think in my opinion nationally, with how he's been able to really help transform this Minnesota team is Elijah Hawkins. He's done a phenomenal job. The Howard transfer, short, quick, athletic guard. Averaging about 9 and 8 a game, 9 points, 8 assists, right? The ability to control the tempo of this team is exactly what they were missing from years past, and not having that true point guard who could make plays off of the dribble and really pass players open. Minnesota's had some talented players in the past, but they've not had that true point guard who could really orchestrate the offense. And he does it on both ends of the floor, not only his ability to lead the team offensively with his playmaking, but also defensively. I mean, he leads the Big Ten in assist percentage, and then is also third in the Big Ten in steal percentage. And that's two really, really valuable stats to have when you are a point guard, the leader of the team, right, and the head of the snake there in both areas. Minnesota moves the ball great offensively. They shoot the ball well. Have about 4 guys who can make about 37, 38% or more of threes. And again, this is a good offensive rebounding team as well. So, when you put together the recipe to beat Indiana, Minnesota's yet another team that has a lot of different options and a lot of ways that they can really beat and control the tempo for Indiana. I think the best thing is this is a home game because we know what the crowd does specifically for this team. Helps any team out. I don't know if there's a better home court advantage than what Indiana has in Assembly Hall, especially over the last couple of seasons under Mike Woodson. Just their inability to win on the road, but a total 180 at home, and some of the wins that they're able to pull out, and some of the performances, even in some of the couple close losses, some of those performances that they're able to have in Assembly Hall is vastly different than what any other team can say when they come to a home court advantage. So, Indiana needs to be ready, needs to be able to obviously kind of turn in that Ohio State effort that they had, do a little bit better, obviously on the boards than what they did against Ohio State, but be able to put together that kind of full 40 minutes of basketball that we've become accustomed to not seeing, especially when it comes to over the last month and a half here. But like I said, good thing this one's at home. I think you got to feel a lot better about their chances in this one. But it's now a very, very critical game that you have to have. That when you looked at the schedule when it was released earlier this fall and this summer, it's probably not a game that you had circled if you're an Indiana fan. And now it becomes an absolute must-win in order to right the ship a little bit, get a win over a decent Big Ten team, and at least just not get a loss. And at this point, doesn't matter what win you get, you're just playing for non-losses because you can't suffer that many more going deep into Big Ten play and expect to show up as an at-large bid when it comes to the NCAA tournament.
I think for every game moving forward, I think it's circled every single game. So that's just the way it is. And you mentioned it. You don't care how you take it, but as Indiana teams won ugly all season long, there has been 0 pretty wins all year. So I think if you're an Indiana fan, you just got to take what you get as far as wins. So, and just be proud of the fact that you got the win in the first place. So that's just my quick thought.
Yeah, tomorrow has the chance to be the start of, I don't want to say a new, because I feel like Woodson had a quote about he's got to get him over the hump. I feel like he said that probably at least 3 times this year. Feels like
he said it multiple times the past few years.
We're 2.5 years into his tenure and into the Mike Woodson era. That it's also very frustrating to continue to hear that every single loss, got to get them over the hump. At some point, either you are or you aren't. You can't be still figuring this out going into deep into your 3rd season. I understand this roster is vastly different than the last 2 years, but you knew you weren't going to have Trace Jackson Davis for very much longer. You knew you weren't going to have Jalen Hood-Schifino, right? That get them over the hump or stop talking about it. It's ridiculous to continue to talk about the same thing over and over and over again. It's ridiculous.
It absolutely is. Absolutely it is. I want to know how big that hump is because it seems monstrous.
I was going to say, it feels like a mountain.
They're still climbing.
And I just want to know, what does he mean by the hump? I mean, what is he meaning by that? I mean, it's just, is he trying to say, I need to get this team to get the chemistry put together? I need to get them focused, whatever. That's the problem is it's just so vague and we don't know that is what it is. So, but yeah, got to quit saying that. Obviously, I mean, he said it a lot his first 2 years. I feel like he kind of dialed it back a little bit this year, but him saying it the other day after that performance, after that ugly performance, it's just something that just does not sit well for this Indiana fan base and just a lot of people in general.
Yeah, I mean, at least you're back at home, a chance to get a big, you mentioned it, Alec. I don't think I never would have thought Minnesota in Assembly Hall would have been this big of a game, but here we are. I mean, this is as must win as it can get at this point of the year, because if you lose to Minnesota at home, it could be the start of a snowball effect where the rest of the season kind of slowly starts to drift away, or maybe quickly. Especially with the next,
yeah, and going into the next stretch, right? You have Purdue, Wisconsin, Illinois, at Wisconsin and at Illinois. These are the next 4 games coming up. If you're sitting in your spot right now, obviously we're recording this before the Minnesota game, so we have no idea how they're about to look tomorrow or Friday night, right? But looking at it right now, I mean, if I were to guess, right, that's an 0-3 stretch, Purdue, Wisconsin, Illinois. The way that they've looked, right? 2 of them on the road going up against Purdue. Obviously a team that they've had some success in. But again, that was with the heroics of Jalen Hood-Schifino and obviously the front court that they had, which was a lot more seasoned, a lot more veteran and experience with Trace Jackson Davis and Race Thompson. I mean, what do you guys think this stretch looks like coming up? Because I mean, you have to find a way to get one of those wins.
Absolutely.
Just one.
Absolutely. Me personally, Minnesota game aside, I'm going to already assume that's going to be a win. I don't know how it's going to be, but I assume Indiana's going to win this game. My thought on that one. But you look at it, they got to win one big game, right? This season, they got to just win one. They got to figure out a way to win one. And I think if it's not going to be any other team this season, it's going to be Purdue. Because you mentioned it, that home court advantage is legit. it is obviously it's a 6-man on the floor. And obviously, Mike Woodson's figured out a way to beat Purdue. And like you mentioned, they had Jalen Hood-Schifino, Trace Jackson Davis. Obviously, they had those guys to do it. But I think if there's going to be one win, I don't expect them to win at Wisconsin. I really don't expect them to win at Illinois. I think Illinois is going to be wanting some major revenge from that beatdown that they gave them last year at the other Assembly Hall. But I think if there's going to be one game that they win, it's got to be Purdue, right? I mean, honestly.
Yeah. I mean, if all 3 games are at home, I mean, I do think they beat Minnesota. I think the Assembly Hall effect, I think just knowing like what we've seen from Woodson after losses, it feels like this team tends to have bounce back performances where they kind of come out firing. And I kind of expect that for the tomorrow night, but you look forward. I don't think they're going to beat Purdue, but you never know with that Assembly Hall effect. I mean, Wisconsin, I think, is so talented. I don't see Indiana beating them on the road. Illinois, I mean, if Terrence Shannon's playing, I'd say no chance, but you really don't know with him. I know he filed a restraining order to try to play. So if he's on the court, I give Indiana a very slim chance there. But if he's not, one of those things, you never know. But I really like if Indiana comes out of this stretch, like my prediction, I think it's going to be 1-3, beat Minnesota, then lose the next 3, and then that puts you, I believe, at 12-8, and that's not where you want to be 20 games into the season.
No, not at all. And then you would have I think if the math is correct, you'd have a below 500 record in the Big Ten. So
yeah,
you're just finding an uphill battle. And we've talked about it before, Drew. We talked about it last week when we did the Big Ten preview. This is not a year where you could have a slightly above 500 record in the Big Ten, let alone a below 500 record in the Big Ten and expect to make the tournament. Not as strong as it once was as far as nationally ranked teams and just teams that are really, really good. I mean, I don't think that they're going to take a whole lot of teams from the Big Ten this year. If Indiana wants to be one of them, they got to fix things, and they got to fix it quickly.
Yeah, I don't want to harp too much on Purdue since obviously we still have Minnesota in between there, and a lot can happen before then. But I think they have absolutely no shot of beating this Purdue team because the matchup's not going to be won in the paint, in my opinion. I think you look at this backcourt and coming into this year, right? I think last year, right, you had the advantage in the backcourt. Coming into this year, you had to assume you probably still have the advantage in the backcourt. The way that Braden Smith and Fletcher Lawyer have played this season, I think especially Braden Smith, the step that he took, he's a vastly different guard than what he was last season. And I think a lot of those, late game situation struggles that he had in key games last year for Purdue only helped him this offseason. Those perimeter players are doing much, much better of a job of hitting shots when they need to, but also making plays off of the bounce, which was not a huge threat that they had a season ago. I think that backcourt absolutely dominates Indiana's backcourt, regardless of what happens with, Xavier Johnson and what kind of game that he has, because they're consistent. They are playing like veteran guards. And they are extremely, extremely consistent from half to half, something that you don't get with Indiana. So I think, again, obviously, starts with Minnesota here, an absolute must win. But I think you look at that next 3-game stretch, and that's going to be probably one of the more difficult stretches in anyone's schedule, regardless of obviously that game at Assembly Hall against Purdue. But you look right after that potentially. If you do squeeze one of those wins out, 2 at home, Iowa, Penn State, and then at Ohio State, obviously a team that they just beat last weekend. So a little bit of a let up there at the second part of that schedule. But have to absolutely win on Friday.
And I will say this. I just want to say one thing about Purdue. No, we don't want to harp on it too much, but Purdue has shown they are beatable on the road. Now, I will say with Nebraska and Northwestern, they have a better backcourt than what Indiana has, but you can't sit here and say that they don't have a better home court advantage than what Indiana will have. And I think, honestly, especially with how big of a rivalry game this is, I think that's going to play a big, big factor. And it just all comes down to, will Xavier Johnson play like the Ohio State Xavier Johnson, or will he play like the Nebraska and especially the Rutgers Xavier Johnson? I think he can really cause a lot of pressure with Braden Smith. He's just got to play like a mature 6-year senior.
Yeah, I mean,
and just Indiana also doesn't have the flamethrowers that Nebraska and Northwestern had. They had 24 combined threes, so that's a big difference as well, regardless of where you're playing. But yeah, obviously don't want to be too negative here on Indiana, but that's what we got for the show
it's a
today.
negative time right now. It's a negative feeling right now.
You need you look at the wins for Northwestern, Boo 31-9, Keisei Tominaga 19, and a couple other guys, CJ Wilcher
and
16.
Bryce Williams also had a damn near triple double.
Yeah. So you need your guards. Indiana's going to need what we saw from Trey Galloway against Kansas, that type of performance from one of their guards, if they're going to hope to beat Purdue.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, it's not going to be one in the paint, like Alec said. I think Mike Woodson's going to have to really put on his good coaching shoes that game, and he's going to have to really game plan well. I'd like to see a little bit more of Zach Edey trying to have to come out and try to guard the perimeter, whether it be with Malik or Kalel stretching it out a little bit. But it's going to come down to shot making as well. Indiana, I will say, maybe gotten a little bit better shooting the three, at least shooting it a little bit more with confidence. So, and especially you got a guy like CJ Gunn, who these past 2 games, I felt like he's shot the ball with confidence. He hasn't hit everything, and that is fine for him. He's a volume shooter. And then especially Mackenzie Mbako, who I feel like is finding his groove right now as far as shooting. So a lot of confidence in this team. If they can just hit their shots, defend, good things could happen there in that game. But obviously, you got to get past Minnesota first. Like Mike Woodson says, you can't really look past any game right now. You got to look at it, right here and now, and you got to look at Minnesota. You got to take care of that one first.
Yeah, you mentioned it. I mean, tomorrow's it's tomorrow first. Indiana hosts Minnesota, 6:30 p.m. at Assembly Hall. I'll be there. Kyler will be there. Alec, you'll be there, I believe, and we'll have full coverage for Hoosier Illustrated. As always, for all things IU athletics, follow Indiana_FRN on Twitter, Facebook, and check out the HoosierIllustrated.com website. And make sure to subscribe on YouTube and Spotify. As always, thank you for listening to the Talking About the Hoosiers podcast. We'll be back next week.